I've always been the odd one out, right from the moment I drew my first breath. Standing there, right in front of me, my mother scowled with a mix of revulsion and irritation plastered across her face, a look I had come to know all too well. Enough already. Always showing up in front of me with that face I absolutely despise. Can't you do something about that face? I sighed internally, the words slicing through me, yet familiar. Sorry about that. It's not like I chose to be born like this, I murmured, my voice a mixture of resignation and defiance. Yet, her cold stare didn't falter. What? You're talking back now? You've become so cheeky lately. Just because you're 12 doesn't mean you can start rebelling against your parents, she snapped, her tone laced with annoyance and something darker. I was born blind in my right eye, which caused it to enlarge slightly, making my face look unbalanced. My mother, ever so critical, was appalled by my appearance from the start. She had told me numerous times about the moment of my birth, how she considered abandoning me, but was scolded severely by her own parents. Reluctantly, she decided to raise me, a decision she reminded me of constantly, as if it were my burden to bear. That's rich, coming from you, who raised me out of obligation and now pretends to be a parent, I shot back quietly, my words carrying a bitterness that had grown over the years. I had never thought of her as my parent, not really. She looked at me as if I were something vile, her gaze devoid of any warmth. It's so noisy first thing in the morning. What's with you guys? Let me sleep in on a day off, will you? I called out, hoping to deflect her harsh words. You should say something to her too. You must dislike her face just as much, right? She barked towards my father, who had just woken up, his presence adding to the tension. What? Of course, I dislike that disturbing face. It's your fault for giving birth to such a child, forcing us to take care of her. We should have gotten rid of her a long time ago, he replied coldly, his words echoing through the room, slicing through any semblance of familial warmth. It doesn't matter what your parents said, he continued, his voice harsh as he mentioned casually getting rid of me, his words chilling me to the bone. To them, I was nothing more than a disturbing face, a burden they were forced to bear. To me, they were just unpleasant relatives, uncle and aunt in essence, who fed me and housed me, nothing more. I wasn't sad, I knew they were that kind of people. It didn't matter to me. Yes, a failed, worthless human like you. I have no recollection of giving birth to you, my mother suddenly declared, turning to whisper something to my father. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the secretive tones and glances made it clear they were plotting something. If you have something to say, just say it clearly, I demanded, though I knew it wouldn't change anything. Nothing. Anyway, we have errands to run this morning, so we'll be leaving soon, she replied briskly, as they started eating, then hurriedly prepared and left the house. Often, they left in the morning and returned at night, so initially, I didn't think much of it. But that day was different. They didn't return that day, nor the next, and slowly, days turned into a week, then a month, leaving me in a silence that was both a curse and a blessing. With each day that passed in silence, the weight of abandonment grew heavier. It wasn't just the absence, it was the harsh reality that it had happened once before, but never for this long, a whole month. In a whirlwind of confusion and a desperate need for answers, I decided to call the only lifeline I felt I had left, my maternal grandparents. Ah, hello, Grandpa, I said, my voice trembly but clear. Ah, Anna, what's up? Why the sudden call? My grandfather answered, his voice always brought a sense of calm, despite the storm brewing inside me. Have you heard anything from Mom? From Dorothy? I asked, hoping for some news. No, I haven't heard anything, he replied, his tone now tinged with concern. I poured out everything to him, the verbal abuse from my mother, the disdain from my father, the chilling words, and their disappearance. Dorothy did that, and they haven't come back for a month. Are their belongings still there? He asked, trying to grasp the situation. Yes, I responded quietly. What should I do? The vulnerability in my voice was unmistakable. Come to our house. I'll come to pick you up in an hour, he decided firmly, and true to his word, an hour later, my grandfather arrived to whisk me away from the place that had become a prison of solitude and scorn. Living with my grandparents felt like stepping into a different world. It was there, in the warmth of their home, that I learned perhaps it wasn't just my mother's cruelty that was to blame, but a consequence of their insistence she raise me. It seems Dorothy raised you reluctantly, because we told her to properly raise her child. I can't help but think maybe we should have taken you in and raised you ourselves. I really put you through a lot of trouble. I'm sorry, my grandfather confessed one evening, his voice heavy with regret. I tried to comfort him. It's not your fault. It's Mom to blame, because I'm blind in my right eye and it's enlarged, making my appearance unpleasant. She despised me for that alone. The last words my mother had hurled at me, "I don't remember giving birth to something like you," were the only ones that had truly pierced my heart. Seeing my tears, my grandfather handed me a handkerchief, his voice gentle and reassuring. Dorothy has always been like that, a person who judges others by their appearance and looks down on them. She's the one who doesn't understand anything. Just wait and see, you'll prove how capable you are in the future. Encouraged by his words, I embraced the opportunities my new life offered. 12 years later, I was living proof of my grandfather's belief in me. I had learned various skills, started a company, and, against all odds, became the CEO of a company boasting an annual revenue of $150 million. Then, as if drawn by the rumors of success, my parents reappeared. They came to my company, their heads bowed, not in respect, but in desperation. It was a stark contrast to the disdain and neglect they had shown me all those years ago. My name is Anna, and though born with a disability that distorted my face, I had endured and risen above the verbal abuse and superficial judgments. As I faced them, every harsh word about my appearance echoed back, especially my mother's disdainful remarks, "Really, can't you do something about that face of yours? I get sick every time I see it." But standing there, in my office, with everything I had achieved, those words had lost their sting. Growing up with a visual impairment was a constant struggle, made infinitely harder by the person who was supposed to protect and nurture me, my mother. I still vividly recall being just 3 years old when she would frequently touch my enlarged eye, not out of care, but out of a twisted curiosity. She would tamper with my face and even use my blindness to her advantage, placing obstacles in my path to watch me trip. "Why can't you see that right in front of your feet? Be more careful, you're such a failure," she would chide, her voice laced with disdain rather than concern. As I grew older, the harassment only escalated. My father, who might as well have been blind too, for all the help he offered, did nothing. Whenever I sought his aid, his reaction was just as hurtful. "Don't come near me because you're disgusting." There was no one in my family to stand by me. Today, Mom mentioned my eye again. Every day I would retreat to my room, talk to my dolls, and cry shocked and pained that my mother did not see me as her child. What was I supposed to do? By the time I was 12, any affection I might have felt for my parents had completely evaporated, and I made a conscious decision to resist their mistreatment rather than endure it passively. "Don't mess with me. You always call me disgusting and a failure, but aren't you the real failures for looking at your child this way?" I would retort. These verbal exchanges with my mother became increasingly common. She fought back, but I was determined not to lose. Around this time, my parents began to leave the house more frequently. "I'm going out," was all she would say, leaving me clueless about their whereabouts. When I was younger, they would return after half a day or a day, but recently they wouldn't come back until late at night, sometimes even staying away for a week. However, when my suffocating parents were not around, I felt a sense of relief, and strangely, their absence worked in my favor. "Anna, do you want to study more?" my mother unexpectedly asked one day. I had wanted to attend middle school and had plans to apply and take the entrance exams for the school of my choice. But without my knowledge, she unilaterally canceled my application, blocking my path to further education. "Why? What are you thinking? You don't need middle school. Why do you think someone like you, a failure, can go to the same school as normal people? Get over yourself," she taunted. Her words were always belittling, harsh, and unyielding. Failure, failure, you always belittle people like that. Why do you hate me so much? Why won't you let me do what I want? You're not human. You can't see with your right eye, it's larger than normal, making your appearance inferior to others. Don't act like you're the same as everyone else, she declared with a cruelty that shook me to my core. My mother had never gone that far before, but facing me that day, she finally did. The words that pierced my heart. The most were harsh and cold, marking moments of deep pain and confusion. Why? Why did I have to be told such things? The raw unfairness of it, the blatant disregard for my feelings and aspirations, haunted me deeply. I'm alive and talking like a human, saying I'm not human is just cruel. The phrase, not human, was too frustrating. I had resolved in my heart to refute everything I had been told and to out-argue my mother's reasoning, but those words broke my spirit. This led me to seclude myself in my room and cry every day. As she declared, my mother withdrew my middle school application and started to neglect me at home. Your dad and I will be gone all day today, she would say, and then leave, leaving only a little food behind which I had to prepare and eat myself. Though manageable for a day, the duration of their absences began to extend to 3 days a week, sometimes longer. Where could they always be going? On a certain day, my parents returned home carrying big bags. We're home, they announced. I had never reacted so strongly before, but seeing them come in with gift shop bags and dressed like they had just come back from a trip, I was taken aback and couldn't help but exclaim out loud, "What's that? Where have you been?" "Oh, how unusual for you to ask such a thing. Do you want to know?" "No, not really," I replied, irritated by my mother's unnaturally cheerful demeanor. I acted disinterested, though I was curious. But my mother started talking about it as if she wanted to. "Actually, we went to Hawaii," she revealed. "Ah, I thought so." They were wearing aloha shirts and had sunglasses on their heads. They must have had a good time. At that moment, I was certain my parents' frequent absences were due to them going on trips without me. They didn't want to show the world my shabby face, so they left me behind to avoid that. "Whatever, go do whatever you want, scum," my mother's gleeful tone irritated me, and I blurted out those words coldly. Perhaps angered by my response, my mother slapped me without a word. "What's with that dull response? Mocking me? What do you mean by that? What do you expect me to say to insensitive parents going overseas without their child?" I didn't mess with her. I glared fiercely at my mother and retreated to my room. I was appalled by my parents' despicable behavior and didn't even want to see their faces. Too upset to cry, I just curled up in the dark room, emptying my mind on the bed without thinking about anything. Maybe it would be better to just run away from this house than to live like this, that thought crossed my mind. But what could I do at the age of 12? Even if I ran away, my parents wouldn't come looking for me. But I realized, deep down, something needed to change. I had no means to live on my own and, despite the tumultuous relationship, ended up staying at home. The next morning felt different somehow. My mother was in a particularly bad mood. Was she still upset about yesterday's incident? As I was about to go to the bathroom, I was greeted by the usual scolding from my mother. "Enough already, always appearing in front of me with that face. I can't stand it. Can't you do something about that face?" But her tone wasn't light as usual, it was heavier, adding a weight to my already burdened feelings. What followed was an argument between me and my mother, and after whispering something meaningful to my father, who had just woken up, they left the house a few minutes later, never to return. After being absent from the house for a month, I was convinced I had been abandoned. Remembering my earlier thoughts of maybe I should just leave this house, I felt a bit teary. I was glad my parents were truly gone, but the overwhelming feeling of being completely alone brought on anxiety. I'm lonely. I'm starting to feel lonely now that I think I've really been abandoned. Mom, Dad. In the midst of feeling lonely, thoughts of my mother and father briefly crossed my mind. However, those feelings were quickly overshadowed as I thought of someone else, my maternal grandfather, who often took me to his home, where I had stayed many times as a child. It must have been because I lacked the ability to live on my own back then, so he would take me to his place, not to leave me alone at home. Remembering my kind grandfather, I called the only number I knew of him and told him everything that had happened. Mom told me she said I'm not human. She called me a failure and said she raised me out of obligation. Hearing my grandfather's voice after such a long time brought me relief, and as I poured out my heart, tears welled up uncontrollably, and I broke down crying on the phone. I hadn't realized how much I needed to cry until that moment. Come to our house. I'll come to pick you up right away, his kind voice over the phone comforted me, and I waited for him to come that very day. I was taken to live with my grandfather. How are your grades, Anna? His sudden question puzzled me, and I asked back, why? In response, he handed me a pamphlet. The middle school brochure. Yes, Anna, you weren't allowed to go to middle school, were you? Why don't you give it a try? Midterm admissions are possible, and don't worry about the money. I'll take care of it. Go there and study hard. Don't you want to study? I love studying, my grandfather encouraged warmly, his belief in my potential shining through his words. The disdainful environment I had lived in with my parents had driven me to find refuge in education, where I had many friends, though now I couldn't see them anymore. Well, you can always make new friends. And about your eye, your parents did nothing about it, right? How about getting surgery? It won't bring back the light, but it might help with the imbalance. Really? Would you do that for me? I asked, hope flickering in my voice. Of course, if it makes you healthier and happier. I'm willing to spend whatever it takes. Don't worry, I have plenty of savings. There's no point in saving it for my old age if I can use it for you now, he replied, his words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I was overjoyed. My grandfather was not only willing to help me attend middle school but even get surgery to improve my condition, which did make my appearance somewhat better after getting a prosthetic eye. Starting anew, I enrolled in high school, and later, my grandfather suggested something that would steer the course of my future in an unexpected direction. You truly are my granddaughter, you've inherited the good traits. Not just your exceptional grades in math, but also your overall academic performance. With brains like yours, why not study business management? Business management? I echoed, initially surprised by his suggestion, but feeling it was a chance to prove myself against my mother and her demeaning views. Yes, why not learn how to manage a company? Then you can give those foolish parents a lesson, he added, a twinkle of mischief in his eye. I felt empowered by his confidence in me and the opportunity to redefine my narrative. As I pursued my studies, my grandfather occasionally checked on my estranged parents through his smartphone, allowing me to keep up with their whereabouts indirectly without revealing my presence at the family home. I had hoped your mother would learn business management and take over the company I managed, but she chose her own path, leaving home and only returning to drop you off. Such a disgraceful child, he would say sometimes. Grandpa, does that mean I'll take over the company? I asked one day, curious about the future he envisioned for me. Well, the original company is gone, but a subsidiary survived. They've been looking for a successor, and it seems like a good opportunity for you. Your intelligence should serve you well in business management, so give it a try, he explained. Following my grandfather's advice, I enrolled in a business-focused high school, graduated, and learned more about being an entrepreneur. By the age of 20, I was put in charge of the subsidiary, and by 24, my business acumen had flourished, achieving an annual turnover of $150 million. Over 12 years, I gained financial independence and a more presentable appearance. Anna, you've done well, my grandfather would say, pride evident in his voice, affirming that despite the turbulent beginnings, the journey had led to a place of success and self-reassurance. I never imagined I'd have such business talent. Even in his prime, my grandfather confessed he couldn't achieve a turnover of $150 million. I'm glad to have discovered your potential. No, it's all thanks to you, Grandpa. If you hadn't told me to come to your house, I couldn't have grown so much. Who knows what would have become of me otherwise? The thought of being left behind in that old apartment made me shudder. While my grandfather and I were indulging in our nostalgic thoughts, his phone suddenly rang. Hello? Dad, I was hoping to talk to you about something. Is it okay if I come over this evening? It was my mother, her voice strained with a hint of urgency. A favor? What's all this about all of a sudden? Yeah, I think I mentioned it in a message before. It's about money. You never learn, do you? I've always tried to teach you to handle these things properly. You know this happens because you never listen. I'm really sorry anyway. Alright, come over. I'll listen to what you have to say. My grandfather's tone was firm, perhaps a bit harsh, reflecting his frustration, but also a resigned familiarity with these calls. The caller was my mother, discussing money matters. My grandfather's face remained emotionless as he dealt with the conversation, exuding an attitude of looking down on her. Yes, it was Dorothy. She'll be coming over this evening. It's a perfect opportunity for a comeback, Anna. Make sure you're here. But I'm a bit scared, I confessed, a knot forming in my stomach. Don't worry, you're not 24 anymore. If it makes you feel better, bring your boyfriend. Having a strong man around might give us an advantage, especially since your father will be there too. It's just a precaution, in case anything happens, my grandfather reassured me with a wink, lightening the mood. By then, I had a fiancé who worked with me as the vice president of our company, a young talent who had stayed with the subsidiary when I took over. He had always supported me, becoming my partner in both business and life. Fiancé, chairman, this is so sudden. I've heard about it from Anna, but this might be too much for me. Stop calling me chairman, that was back when I was with the company. Now, I'm just a retiree living a quiet life. You've been Anna's partner all this time and you're strong. I can rely on you. Come on, it'll be fine, my grandfather said, convincing him with his forceful persuasion. My fiancé eventually agreed, even managing a laugh. Thank you. I'll see you this evening. I hadn't expected to reunite with my parents so suddenly. Despite my fears, I tried to calm my nerves, finishing up work before returning home with my fiancé, as per my grandfather's instructions. For now, you two hide in the next room. I'll start the conversation. When I hit the table, that's your cue to come out. My fiancé and I agreed and hid in the adjacent room, waiting for the signal. The moment was fraught with tension, but also a peculiar sense of anticipation about confronting the past and perhaps altering its hold on us forever. It's been a while. Sorry for dropping by like this, I could hear my mother's high-pitched voice from the other room. Just hearing it made me freeze in fear for a moment. Are you okay? You look terrified. Do you think you can handle this? My fiancé comforted me, rubbing my back to soothe my nerves as I trembled slightly. You mentioned something about needing— What's going on? My grandfather's voice was firm, cutting through the tense air. Actually, I've gotten into some debt and I need a substantial amount to pay it off. I was hoping to borrow some money from you, my mother confessed, her voice laced with desperation. I don't have money to lend to you. Whatever your situation, you're an adult. You need to take responsibility for your debts. What kind of adult at 50 still doesn't get that? My grandfather retorted sharply. Then why did you ask us to come here? You could have just said no over the phone, my mother argued, her voice rising with frustration. Let me ask you something. What about your child, huh? Child, what about Anna? I'm asking if you properly raised her. You hardly ever contact us, never visit, and barely mention Anna. She should have gone through middle and high school by now. She should be working at her age, but we haven't heard a thing from you. What's the meaning of this? My grandfather's voice boomed with accusation. It all depends on the child, doesn't it? I did my part, made sure she went through middle and high school and watched over her until she became an adult. I don't know which company she joined, but she must be enjoying herself, right? My mother's voice dropped, the initial shrillness giving way to a rougher tone. It sounded like the voice of someone hiding something. Pressing my ear against the sliding door, I started listening intently to the conversation between her and my grandfather. I see. So, who was the one who called this house 12 years ago, huh, Dorothy? Where were you for an entire month 12 years ago? On a trip, leaving your child alone for a month. What were you doing? What? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I'm going to make you spill everything about Anna, about your financial situation, all the truth. My grandfather's shout was a signal for us. I slid the door open with force and appeared in front of my mother. Long time no see. Do you recognize me, huh? My sudden appearance shocked both my mother and my silently sitting father, their eyes wide open. Why are you here? And how come your eye? My mother began, confusion and shock etched into her face. My eye isn't healed. I had surgery to remove it, and now I have a prosthetic eye. And as for why I'm here, you left me in that house 12 years ago. Grandpa told me to come here, and he took me in, I replied, my voice steady and confident, confronting the past that had once threatened to break me. I threw those words at her, driven by emotion. Honestly, I was scared, my body trembled, but I mustered all my courage to confront her with the truth. Wait, she raised her voice, glaring at my grandfather with a look of defeat. Don't joke around. What is all this? Don't you understand the situation? I told you to tell us everything. The fact that Anna is here should make it clear what needs to be discussed. I won't let you pretend to forget. My grandfather exerted pressure, and my mother faltered, sitting back down and beginning to talk, looking down. What do you want me to say? What do you want to know, Anna? Why did you leave me alone in that apartment 12 years ago? What were you always leaving the house for? My voice was steady, demanding answers. My mother sighed deeply before beginning. At that time, we indeed disappeared from the apartment. We were looking for a new place to live, and within a month, we found a new apartment and moved in. So, you really didn't want me around, I pressed, feeling a mix of vindication and deep hurt. Yes, I couldn't stand being with a child with such an ugly face. After our fight that day, I decided to leave you behind as part of my plan. Her words were cold, and it felt like each one was a blow. I always thought so, but you really are the worst mother. How could you do that to your own child? Except a face like that, plus a child born blind in one eye, a burden right from the start, I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. I hated the idea even more as the argument between me and my mother escalated. My fiancé, unable to stand it any longer, stepped forward, glaring at her as he began to speak. What's so wrong with Anna, huh? H1, I'm not seeing her face being different. I've seen her childhood photos, and I thought she looked perfectly normal. How could you say such awful things to an innocent child? You're the worst. What you? I've been wondering who's been lurking behind Anna. Don't be into a family argument, she snarled, her voice dripping with disdain. She's my dearest partner and the president of our company. How could I not protect her? My fiancé countered, his support unwavering. My mother was taken aback by his words and suddenly grabbed me by the collar. What did that man just say? You're a company president? Someone lower than me acting all high and mighty, don't be ridiculous. Lower? Who's lower exactly? Just so you know, the company you're at is a subcontractor for the company I manage. What do you mean? I fired back, now gaining ground. If you're a subcontractor, that means information flows to us. If you were working for our company as a subcontractor, you should have been receiving a decent salary. Struggling to repay debts doesn't make sense. You're lying, aren't you? My pointed question visibly unsettled my mother. That's when my father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Hold on, Dorothy. Don't jump to conclusions. His voice, though quiet, carried a weight that seemed to momentarily pause the heated exchange. He attempted to silence my mother, as if trying to hide something. However, she shook him off and began to spill the truth. Yes, I'm lying. We were planning to move abroad, cut off all ties here. It turns out it's more expensive than we thought, so I figured why not squeeze some money out of Dad now? Of all times, what's wrong with that, huh? With that admission, my father looked defeated, while my grandfather's anger peaked, and he slapped my mother across the face. I've always known you had a bad streak, but this is unbelievable, you ungrateful wretch. Planning to extort money from your own parents? Enough. Let me tell you, with a personality like yours, you're only going to face hardship in life, just like your mother did. You're in for a world of pain. Turning his eye towards my father, my grandfather approached him next. And you, Steve, what were you thinking staying with her? Birds of a feather flock together, is it? I thought you were a decent person when you asked for her hand in marriage. Are you trash too? No, it's not like that, I just can't believe you'd say such things. I've heard from Anna about the terrible things you've said to her, disgusted by her face. Weren't you? Stop, please, my father pleaded, his voice cracking. I was just influenced by Dorothy, not really. He stammered, trying to find his footing in the argument. So you're just a follower, huh? Picked the wrong person to associate with, unfortunately for you, my grandfather concluded, his disdain palpable. That was the first time I saw my father look so scared and weak, easily swayed by others. Perhaps it was because he had met my mother that he could act so arrogantly when they were together. Feeling this, I started to see my father as the most pitiable person at that moment. Oh, I see what a pitiful man, I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. Enough, Steve has nothing to do with this, it's all my fault, right? What do you want, calling me here? Revenge for all the pain I endured as a child? I'm going to make sure you experience it, my mother defied, still unrelenting. What do you mean? For starters, you're fired. You've been enjoying a good salary. But that's over now. That's it. With my skills, I can find another job easily, you think so? I will sue you for everything you did to me during my childhood and take it to court, I declared firmly, my voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions. That's impossible, it was 12 years ago. Did you think I hadn't looked into it? What you did to me constitutes child abuse, neglect, and domestic violence, and there's solid evidence for it, even if it happened decades ago. I can still bring it to court after consulting about it, my mother scoffed, dismissing my threats. The harm I've suffered from you is immeasurable, even this eye, which could have been fixed with surgery, you neglected for 12 years. You didn't want to spend money on me, did you? That's why you left it untreated, right? That's clearly child abuse. So what, you want money from me? Show some sincerity. You neglected your own child to this extent. If it weren't for Grandpa, where do you think I'd be now? I went back to the apartment later to collect my things, you were gone, left on your own, and now you're saying all this, I continued, laying out the stark reality of her failings. My mother remained unyielding, intent on bulldozing her way through with her stubbornness, but that was impossible. I broached the subject of the lawsuit once more. I've consulted a lawyer about the child abuse, neglect, and domestic violence among other charges against you. It looks like we can claim around $100,000 in damages, and that's a conservative estimate. If that's not enough, we can ask for more. The paperwork is ready to go. Wait, are you serious? There's no way I can pay $100,000. Pay up, you scum. Do you have any idea how much I've been through mentally? My mother's face finally showed signs of agitation, her eyes darted around, and she began to falter. Wait, why do I have to pay if I just came to get money? Like I said, people with your kind of personality are bound to suffer. Life doesn't always go your way. From now on, Dorothy, you will live your life atoning for what you've done to Anna. I won't help you, nor you, Steve. My grandfather's final words fell with weight, leaving no room for argument. At my grandfather's final words, my mother collapsed, crying. What emotions those tears held, I couldn't say, but they seemed like tears of frustration to me. The trial will proceed, and you will definitely pay, I stated firmly, handing her a piece of paper to write down her current address, which was crucial for filing the lawsuit. After wrapping up, my fiancé and I escorted my parents to the door, making sure they were completely gone before returning inside. A few days later, the lawsuit was accepted, and we won. I was really touched by your words. How could I not protect her, my dearest partner and the president of our company? If it weren't for that, I might have given up. My mom was pretty scary, my fiancé reflected. I'm glad you were able to confront your mom and settle the past, and now that the money's coming in, everything's looking up. So, yes, huh? You proposed amid all. I smiled at him, recalling the intense moments. I kind of sensed it. Let's get married. And so, my fiancé and I decided to marry at that moment. A year later, we were married and soon blessed with a baby in our lives. Our lives were smooth sailing, but my parents ended up divorcing after a tumultuous time together. My father returned to his parents' home after decades, only to be ignored and live in solitude. My mother tried to return home but was turned away by my grandfather and disowned. She now lives alone in a small apartment, as I heard from my grandfather. People should live their lives honestly and diligently. Living deceitfully and manipulatively like your mother and father will eventually lead to suffering. That's what I've learned. So, make sure to properly educate and raise your child. My grandfather passed away due to old age shortly after saying this. When our child was born, my husband and I moved into my grandparents' house, full of memories, and now we're building a happy home.